Ready. On in 10. Following the media address yesterday, our investigation into these corrupt networks led us right into the heart of the administration. About the digging into the Bonambi social circle and media feeds and all of that.
Yeah, keep working on that, won't you? How's it going with your source?
Collected any intel from Bonambi's office was quite open.
I'm not going to stop pushing. The truth is going to come out. I'm reporting it again. I just wish these platforms would take this seriously.
My favorite is Thai.
No, I can't do a favorite, guys. It's always like a different case, basically.
So, how are you doing?
This needs to stop. You need to go to the police.
Ladies and gentlemen, good morning or evening, depending on where you are in the world. Today, in celebration of International Women's Day, it is with great pleasure that I announce the Netherlands Embassy's collaboration with the Women's Aid Organization on the Saksi Gender Progressive Journalism Project. This innovative initiative begins today with a Gender Progressive Practices panel and will conclude with the launch of a Gender Progressive Journalist database at next year's International Women's Day celebration. In this project, we want to focus on the position of gender in the media in Malaysia, look at good local practices, and learn from experiences in the region and in Europe. This collaboration is cemented by the fact that both Malaysia and the Netherlands have ratified the Convention on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women, CEDAW. We hope this will build and encourage non-discriminatory and gender-progressive news reporting. Changing the stereotype roles of women in the media is one of the priorities of the Netherlands government. We are integrating gender in every aspect of foreign policy, with particular attention to gender-based violence. Gender mainstreaming is one key approach of the Dutch government to strive for global gender equality. Gender equality is not just a goal in and of itself, but it is also widely regarded as a means to solving issues in society everywhere. I hope the result of our cooperation with the Women's Aid Organization will be a more progressive media practice throughout Malaysia. In line with this year's International Women's Day theme of Choose to Challenge, I choose to amplify the voices of the women in the media, and of course, I'm looking forward to hear the voices of the panelists today, experts in their industries, whom I am excited to hear from. I thank you for your attention.
Hello to all, and thank you for joining us today. Press freedom has never been more important than it is now. The role that the news and media have played over this past year in providing information to the public has been paramount in keeping us all informed, empowered, and safe. Journalism speaks to the shaping of public opinion in powerful ways that can be ground-shifting. The voices and stories that are chosen to be spotlighted have the power to make or reshape the norms of our social and political lives. In reporting news and coverage of current issues, the Malaysian media has failed women, often depicting women as victims, with traditional family and societal roles, never as expert opinions. The institutionalized media systems also disempower our women in media. Female reporters are known to be at high risk of gender-based violence in their field, and despite excellence in their work, their voices and careers are constantly stifled by editorial gatekeeping, amongst other systematic issues. For close to 40 years, WAO has been tirelessly working to end gender-based violence, work that would not have been possible without the support of the media. And we will not ignore our women in media. In keeping with this year's IWD theme, we are choosing to challenge and choosing to turn the tide and foster equitable, gender-progressive media practices. Malaysia has ratified CEDAW, and thus has a duty to ensure that women in media are safe. In consonance with recommendations from CEDAW, we must build the capacities of our media, including our information and communications technologies, to prioritize gender mainstreaming and adopt and implement effective measures to eliminate discrimination against women. We have an obligation to our women. We need to collaborate with women in the media to develop and support news and safe engagement platforms for women's voices, views, realities, and priorities to be heard. Above all, we need to rethink content, reframe news with a gender lens. We must listen to the voices of women and work towards the change that women call for. That is the power of the media and the power of voice. Our panel today will explore the gendered challenges of the media landscape and discuss advocacy and reclamation of media spaces. We express our utmost thanks to the Netherlands Embassy for supporting our work as we embark on this journey to challenge the existing media structures and pave the way to ensure progressive, equitable, and feminist coverage and reporting in Malaysia. Our moderator for today is Tehmina Kaoosji, an independent broadcast journalist and gender activist. She's an established figure in our media landscape. Tehmina is also board member and director with the Institute of Journalists Malaysia, and she actively speaks, teaches, researches, and advocates for media freedom and media ethics in Malaysia. Social justice and gender mainstreaming are her key policy angles on every story. And with that, I hand it over to you, Tehmina. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much, Sumitra, Ambassador Jacoby. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Tehmina Kaoosji, your moderator for today. Happy International Women's Day, everyone. Now, it's been quite the year globally since IWD 2020. The COVID-19 pandemic has ravaged the world, and media has shown up 24/7 to fight the accompanying infodemic, the assault on democratic rights, and to uphold freedom of expression. Naturally, women journalists and human rights defenders have also been at the heart of this response. We're so pleased that you've taken the time to join us for today's essential discussion on gender progressive journalism. Please allow me to explain the mechanics of this session before we begin. Our esteemed panelists will each be presenting about the work they do in the arena of furthering gender mainstreaming in media and journalism. And after these 5 mini presentations, we will actually move into the panel moderated by myself, discussing the main challenges as well as actionable areas moving forth. Right after that, we will also be taking audience queries from all of you, so do keep those questions coming. And kindly note, as we will be discussing sensitive issues that are potentially triggering as well, we also will not be allowing for any harassment nor hate speech to be tolerated in any form in the feedback we welcome from the audience. Thank you for that. So, without further ado, everyone, welcome to the Saksi Gender Progressive Journalism Panel Discussion, a collaboration between Women's Aid Organization Malaysia and the Netherlands Embassy in Malaysia. We kickstart the first of our presentations with the wonderful Masjaliza Hamzah. Now, Mas is a freedom of expression advocate and former journalist. She will be speaking on the topic of the intersections of gender and journalism in Malaysia to truly help us set the tone. Hello, Mas.
Hello. Thank you, Tehmina.
Most welcome. The floor is all yours, Mas.
Thank you. Okay, thanks, everyone. My presentation today is based on my experiences and insights. I would actually like to share screen because I have a presentation. And I will do that now. Can people see? Okay. Yes. Okay. Thank you so much. Okay. As mentioned, the presentation is based on these things. Some of it is personal. Some of it is based on interviews that I did with 4 journalists and editors just for this presentation today, and based on reports that I've encountered, reports that have been put together by civil society organizations, media organizations, UNESCO, and all that. If you talk about journalism in Malaysia, then I can say that, and we all will be able to see it, it has come a long way. I can't imagine what it was like back then in the 70s and 80s. It was truly a men's world, super sexist newsrooms, as well as editors. We had, you know, and that went on not just through the 70s and 80s, but well into the 90s. You know, the whole idea, women were expected to laugh off sexist jokes. The idea of reporting sexual harassment was non-existent. I mean, sexual harassment, quote unquote, was not an issue. There was not a name for it in many ways. Women who covered politics and other beats that are seen as important also could not, you know, comprehend and understand that, a lack of awareness in general, not just in society, but also in the newsroom. But things did change, and the change was a slow train. You know, if you want to look at the changes, as someone who was in media, both print and online, I also saw there were top women editors, and whether they are gender sensitive or not, that's another question. Women's desks were created, and women editors appointed. Even if gender sensitization wasn't there, women's desks covered issues that was not just about fashion, beauty, lifestyle, personality pieces. You know, it all expanded into issues. If personality pieces, also strong personalities, people with strong achievements, etc., and all that. So, what helped? How did all this come about? The change, however slow that may be. So, if for people who are aware of some of the meetings and consultations that were done by the UN, there were women conferences in these locations: Nairobi, Mexico, Copenhagen, and Beijing. And in the lead up to that, there were trainings by international CSOs done even in Malaysia by civil society organizations like IDCOM. IDCOM is no longer in existence. You know, all these, in addition to that, all these help change perspectives of women editors and journalists, and help build critical mass to support women's rights in the newsrooms. So this, for example, the framework of women as survivors rather than victims. Another point I want to raise that has helped is the ministers and government policies. I'm not saying by any means that the ministers that we've had were, you know, like 100% on the ball when it comes to women's rights, but they did some things and had some policies that were useful. So ministers such as Zaliha Ismail, Napsia Omar, Sharizat Jalil even. There's a Malaysian policy on women. There was a setting up of the Council for the Integration of Women in Development. Nasirin, all these helped spur some of the changes. And last but not least, radical women helped a lot. For example, I mentioned just now about sexist newsrooms. You know, there were editors who would, you know, if you just joined the newsroom, I was told in the 70s, there was one editor, for example, who actually had a Playboy magazine on his table. And when you pass by, he would open the center spread. So that happened. So when this came up in one of the discussions in the 80s, for example, that's that same a different editor, and women who attended that panel discussion actually complained. 20 women who read this tabloid went to then see that editor and protest about all these quote-unquote sexy, beautiful women appearing on the tabloid's page 1. And as a result of that, it was then pushed to page 3, then to page 5, before taken out completely in the late part of last century. And I mentioned last century because all these are really last centuries, just to give an example. Some things remained though, even when things change. You've got male-dominated newsrooms that were still the norm. Women editors were not gender sensitive. Sexual harassment in the newsroom still happened, even though now there is a name for it and some people do call it out. Also, we will see that newsrooms has privileged middle class and their views of the world. That still remains prominent. And, of course, journalists are trying to change that as well. I think editors need to be critical of the echo chambers. They sometimes may not be interested, but there are some who are willing to listen. So, that kind of reaching out to these have to happen. There's also still an emphasis on the politically powerful. If the minister is not there at an incident or at a meeting, is it newsworthy still? These are some of the questions that journalists, not just women journalists, are still asking. And I think the last point out of this is I want to ask that we need to have more voices from outside of power centers, including women's voices, including LGBTIQ voices. So my next slide, there are a lot of challenges faced by media. So all of you would know this rapid news cycle, everything is online. People want, that buzz that they get from news changing by the minute, by the hour. We've got shrinking newsroom, lack of sustainability in terms of business model for some of these media organizations. Where is the place of women's issues in this kind of reality? Can editors afford to take journalists out of the daily roster to attend trainings if you don't have enough journalists to cover just the basic issues? There's fear and lack of awareness on coverage of LGBTIQ issues. I haven't even mentioned vernacular media coverage and the influence of traditional interpretation of Islam that does not recognize the rights of persons from LGBT communities or even women's rights. Some of the other challenges, there's lack of policy and awareness on sexual harassment in media organizations. Some newsrooms have it, some don't. There's not, the culture of zero tolerance need to be supported. It's important internally and for women journalists to feel safe in carrying out their work. Journalists have to speak up to the powerful, and the newsroom need to have the journalists back. If there is a policy, there also needs to be a review of that policy every now and then. I want to also mention that the Me Too movement that has taken the whole world by storm, especially in the West, it has not impacted Malaysia in a big way so much. It hasn't made much impact in terms of Malaysian journalism, in terms of how we cover issues. Journalists are not reporting sexual harassment for various reasons, and maybe we can discuss this later. And I think for the Me Too allegations to be published, the bar is also higher for media coverage than for individuals who can name and shame online for that to happen. I have some recommendations for media. Media organizations, I feel they can reach out to each other, share policy and good practices in terms of sexual harassment. Editors and unions can reach out to women's CSOs, civil society organizations to hold dialogues, discussions on this issue, help them come up with a policy. Media organizations can be proactive in terms of sexual harassment, being part and parcel of human resource briefings for their new journalists, and do annual reporting in terms of accountability to make room for review of this policy. There are cases where journalists face sexual harassment and it became a springboard from which to cover the issue, which is wonderful. The question asked by one of the journalists I interviewed, if it didn't happen to a journalist, would we as a newsroom have taken it up? And that's something that she posed. I think newsroom policy also has to be the driver of the change and changing in terms of changing the culture of the newsroom. It needs to be structured, otherwise it will not work. Management decides, you must get buy-in from editors and reporters. Journalists need to remind each other of this policy. Women journalists in decision-making positions need to have to take over the leadership in the next 5 years. And then internal accountability checks to see how they cover issues or if they have missed anything. Newsroom policy of supporting women journalists because they are targeted for being women, sexist comments, being trolled, make it known in the editorial meetings that this is not tolerated by the newsroom. In terms of the coverage, we need to focus beyond International Women's Day celebrations. Get women and young women too to be analysts, to be columnists, to offer their perspectives in terms of the news coverage. Individual journalists also need to hold hands with each other to promote issues that affect them or issues that they care about. There's strength in numbers than just working individually. Almost to the last point, women CSOs need to continue to take the lead in shaping the discussion about women issues through the advocacy campaigns, so the media will be able to follow, quote unquote, in reporting the issue. Women CSOs, activists need to be newsworthy, embrace radicalism to get the coverage and get the media to focus on the issues. Currently, there's a weak policy. In terms of on the part of the government. For example, the delay in sexual harassment bill. However, women issues are part of the national agenda and have become mainstream to some extent. What can help? Be the content creator. And I think Saksi is a classic example. Get traditional and new media to refer to the research and reports, exposés done by your website, your blogs, etc. CSOs need to use social media effectively. I believe my colleagues from Malaysia later will cover some of this in their presentation. We need to also tap into champions among media practitioners, especially younger journalists and male allies. I just want to give a shout out to people like Tehmina Kaoosji, to people like Tashni Sukumaran for doing, for creating interest in women as journalists among not just journalism, but also in public. Interested journalists need to alert editors of press statements and developing issues. Young journalists keep up with the buzz on social media. They are also probably less insular about issues. They can persuade or push the editors. Then their interest on the part of the journalists go a long way, even if the editors are not sensitized, even if the environment is still patriarchal. How about trainings? I know some journalists balk at this idea. There's webinar fatigue. We can try to link it to current context. For example, I think people are talking about like women and the pandemic, to just give an example. Some journalists, including editors that CSOs don't know personally, they sometimes don't like to be told what to do, even if they're not aware of new developments, even if they don't know how to look at women's issues from multiple angles. But that can be changed. We can use, that can be changed and it can happen. One way with which to do it is to maybe get power brunch discussions. This doesn't have to be led by the CSOs. It can be led by business women. One person who comes to mind is Mina Chia from The Body Shop, who has been supportive of women's issues. There can be women activists, theater personalities who can support women's leadership in the newsroom and continue to push newsroom and editors to talk about women's issues, to talk about gender issues. Can some business lead this collaboration so the championing also happen outside of women's groups? CSOs, don't be afraid of pitching ideas. Don't be let down if it gets rejected. Develop good relationship with activists and with journalists, including editors, to spark and maintain the interest to cover this topic. Link issues to current concerns. For example, I know that there was one discussion on the weekend about women precariat workers during the pandemic. I thought that's a really good example of how to use current context to link it to women's issues, to link it to equality, rights, and gender justice. One last point, public complaints. They're powerful. If newsrooms don't listen to the editors, if newsrooms don't listen to civil society organizations, women activists, telling them to change, they will listen to the public. Last but not least, I've got like just additional resources that are useful. 50/50 Malaysia is a database of Malaysian women experts. So you can look into that and get them to come and give comments, and maybe you can mine them for examples to use for columnists to be featured in newsrooms. That's also the second one is a very rich and useful research that was done by CRIS, a Malaysian-based civil society organization, together with Institute of Journalists, also based in Malaysia, supported by UNESCO. It's called Voice, Visibility, and Influence Towards Mapping Media Agents of Change for Gender Equality in Malaysia. That's quite a mouthful. I just realized that. Okay, last but not least, UNESCO's Gender Sensitive Indicators for Malaysia. This is just a sample. And that was my last slide, and thank you very much.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Mas. Thank you so very much. That was really richly insightful, as well as really setting the tone for the discussion that we are going to be having throughout this hour and a half. From there, we move on, everyone, to our second presentation, which is on embodying the duality and Indonesian gender activism using journalistic methods. This presentation will be made by the wonderful Ika Ningtyas, who is the General Secretary for the Aliansi Jurnalis Independen, the AJI. Hello, Ika. How are you?
Hi, I'm fine, Tehmina. Thank you.
Happy International Women's Day, Ika.
Yes, happy International Women's Day for everyone here.
Thank you so much for joining us. All right, the floor is yours, Ika. Yep. Please proceed with your presentation.
Tehmina. Yep. Hello, everyone. I'm Ika Ningtyas. I'm General Secretary of AJI. AJI is a journalist organization that was founded in 1994. Is 27 years old. I became AJI first female Secretary General for the first, and we have near 2,000 members in 40 cities in Indonesia. Okay, but I think we have a similar condition between Malaysia and Indonesia. So thank you for Mas for your presentation. Is very insightful for me, and I have presentation for today. Okay, I will give a little context of the development of media in Indonesia. We only gained full press freedom in 1998 after Suharto authoritarian regime collapsed after 32 years in power. In authoritarian regime, it's very difficult to establish media. Censorship and breaches are common stories. A year after the fall of the authoritarian regime, Indonesia has a press law which protects the work of journalists without censorship. The Press Council was established to resolve news dispute. The number of media began to grow, especially print and television. And then the number of media has grown rapidly in the internet era around 1999. It can be seen how the number of online media has increased significantly, which was followed by the weakening of print media. On the one hand, this development is good because there is diversity in content and ownership, but there is an impact on business model that tend to really socially and clickbait. Okay, here's in highlight the inequality between gender in Indonesia. In October last year, the World Economic Forum released a report entitled the Global Gender Gap Report, which didn't paint the best picture for the Southeast Asian country. According to WEF report, Indonesia is ranked in 85 out of 149 countries in the global gender gap ranking. The Philippine rank is better than us. We all know how important the role of the media is to promote gender equality and society. In the last Beijing Declaration remind us of the role of this media to increasing women access and participation through media. But in the last decade, it's very still difficult to achieve that. This is because the number of female journalists is still less than male journalists. AJI survey result showed that there are only 2 women out of 10 journalists. This is also reflected in the composition of the latest number of AJI members. Of our 118 members, only 2% are women. The number of women who lead the media is also small, only around 6%. Most of these women journalists are not policymakers, so it's difficult to make policies that are truly pro towards gender equality. One other injustice in employment is that more female journalists are contract workers. This has an impact on uncertain wages, no social security, and no career path. Another serious situation based on the result of a recent survey, journalists are also vulnerable to sexual violence. Of the 34 respondents in this study, 205 of them had experiences in sexual violence. This happened at the office and during the coverage news. Unfortunately, no media company has taken this case seriously, and no company yet has a guideline for dealing with victims. Yeah, we can see how masculine media companies correlated with news coverage. These are 2 examples of highly biased and sexist reporting. When Myanmar demonstrator Kyaw died fighting against the military junta, the Indonesian media put the word beautiful in the title. For example, it say beautiful Myanmar demonstrator shot dead. It's very sad for reading it. Or the title that don't have the perspective of victim of sexual violence, making them victim many times from the media. Yeah, but in the age of the internet, there are a group of women journalists who have set up a website that promote gender equality. These media are managed by journalists and activists who are quite progressive. They are criticized the mainstream media for gender bias, but the challenge during this year are big enough too. Digital attack on media and journalists are increasing, as are conviction under internet law. Okay, but AJI has long campaigned on issue of gender equality, both to promote equal wages and then advocating for special rights like menstrual holiday, maternity holiday, lactation room, abolition of contract worker. We also increasing journalism skill by affirming the minimum number of female journalists is 30%. We have a workshop on gender equality for media. We campaign about AJI for media coverage and advocate for the revision of the internet law and advocate for victims of digital ethics. And now we arrange guidelines for sexual violence prevention, case management, and trauma recovery for victims. I know it's very big homework for us in AJI, but we have a big collaboration with any organization. So I hope this forum can be start to be a solidarity in regional, so we can strong together. Thank you, Tehmina.
Thank you so much for that, Ika. That was a wonderful presentation. And I think, as you said, there are many parallels between Indonesian newsrooms and Malaysian newsrooms. What particularly struck me was the fact that the gender wage gap is also something that is exacerbated by many journalists being contract workers. I myself am an independent, so I really do understand that. All right. From there, moving on, Ika. Thank you so much. Next up, we actually have Alejandra Aguado of El País. She'll be speaking on penning down patriarchy and the Spanish feminist journalist database. She will also be accompanied by translator Julian in case of any opportunities for that. Thank you so much for being with us, Alejandra. How are you doing?
Thank you so much. Happy International Women's Day to all of
Thank you.
and happy to be here to share the experience of women journalists.
Wonderful. Alejandra, the floor is all yours. Please take it away.
Thank you. First of all, saying that I'm doing my presentation in Spanish because I think I'm going to be more clear or clearer than doing it in English. Sorry for that, but I hope all of us can learn something of each other. Buenos días. Bueno, quiero compartir la experiencia de las periodistas de España desde 2018.
Okay, I would like to share the experience of the Spanish female journalists since 2018.
Aquel año fue un punto de inflexión porque ya se venía experimentando una sensación de unidad desde el año anterior, pero se incrementó.
Okay, that year was a crucial year for the particular reason that there was a feeling that something was changing from the previous year, 2017, but it was actually in 2018 that the unity came around for all female journalists.
En España, en 2018, el día 8 de marzo, se convocó una huelga general por parte de los sindicatos.
Okay, there was in 2018, on the 8th of March, there was a general strike organized by all the main, what's it called? What's it, Alejandra, again?
Sindicatos de trade unions.
Oh, all the unions. Oh, sorry about that. It was all the unions in Spain.
Y las periodistas tuvimos un gran debate de qué hacer ese día, si trabajar cubriendo el 8 de marzo o unirnos a la huelga general.
Okay, so the female journalists have to decide whether they were working on that day or they were going to be taking part on that general strike.
Decidimos hacer huelga y iniciamos un movimiento que se llamó Las Periodistas Paramos.
Okay, so they finally decided to join the strike, and they created this movement called female journalists will stop.
Ese día todas las informaciones de los medios de comunicación, como El País, en el que la mayoría de las periodistas nos unimos a la huelga, la hicieron hombres.
So that day, most of the women joined the strike. So the rest of most of the work of the day was done by men. Is that what you were saying?
Y las periodistas hicimos un manifiesto que firmamos 8.000 periodistas. Escribimos un manifiesto que firmamos 8.000 periodistas.
All right, so all the female journalists signed a manifest that was signed by 8,000 female journalists in Spain.
Lo compartiré a través del chat porque está traducido al inglés para que podáis ver nuestras demandas, pero muy resumidamente son las siguientes.
So she will be sharing this manifest on the main page, but the main points of that manifest are as follows.
Pedíamos que se acabara con la brecha salarial, con el techo de cristal, con la precariedad, que hubiera corresponsabilidad en las tareas del hogar para poder compaginarlas con nuestro trabajo, que se acabase con el acoso sexual y laboral y que hubiera más opiniones escritas por mujeres y mujeres participando en tertulias y acabar, por supuesto, con la mirada parcial masculina en las informaciones.
Okay, so basically they were requesting for equal salary, the sharing of the housework between men and women. Also, they were complaining or they were requesting for the view on the news to be gender neutral. Anything else?
Against the sexual harassment.
Oh, yes.
Also against the glass ceiling. To get to the top positions.
Yeah.
Sorry.
So, go ahead, Alejandra.
Aquello fue un hito, miles de mujeres nos manifestamos en las calles, hicimos huelga y las periodistas estábamos unidas a través de una gran red de grupos de WhatsApp y de Telegram y nos unimos en ese manifiesto para hacer nuestras demandas juntas.
Okay, so it was a huge success, that particular strike on 2018. There was a great unity between all the female journalists, and from that day on, there's been this movement of women journalists united on the same front.
Desde entonces, cada año, las manifestaciones, no solo de periodistas, sino de mujeres en general, han sido más masivas que la anterior.
So from that year onwards, every year the participation of women on the International Women's Day has been bigger in numbers, right?
Pero las periodistas, en el medio en el que yo trabajo, por ejemplo, en el país, continuamos con nuestras demandas para que mejorásemos la igualdad de género en las redacciones.
Okay, but they're still carrying on with their demands on equality, you know, especially in El País. I guess it's the one that you were working on, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
En El País pedimos, por ejemplo, tener una corresponsal de género como lo tenían otros medios, como el New York Times, por ejemplo.
Okay, so in El País, they are requesting to have a female journalist, as they have in other media around the world, like in the New York Times.
También pedimos que hubiera más mujeres en puestos de responsabilidad, que hubiera más opinadoras, que hubiera más balance de género en las informaciones.
So they're also asking for a bigger presence of female roles on the day-to-day participation on media issues again.
Estas demandas se las hemos presentado a los directores del periódico, los que ha habido desde entonces, y hemos tenido logros.
Okay, they have presented all these demands to the persons in charge of the news outlet that this is working on El País, and they have achieved a certain amount of success so far.
Unos meses después de la huelga general de 2018 conseguimos que se nombrase una corresponsal de género que es Pilar Álvarez y sigue siendo ella.
Okay, a few months after the strike of 2018, they managed to get a journalist in charge of, what is he in charge of again?
The gender correspondent is the one in charge of gender issues in the newsroom.
Oh, yes. Okay.
So, conseguimos que se nombrase una, que no había. Conseguimos... Sorry.
No, go ahead.
We finally achieved that the director named a gender correspondent. También conseguimos que hubiera más opinadoras en el periódico.
Okay, so they also achieved a higher number of female correspondents on the newspaper.
Y en cuanto a la petición de que hubiera más mujeres en las tertulias, conseguimos que los hombres iniciaran su propio movimiento, que era No Sin Mujeres, para que no participasen en ninguna tertulia en la que no hubiese mujeres.
All right. So finally, they also managed to achieve the fact that men created their own work groups, also demanding the presence of women on these news work groups.
Y uno de los logros más importantes que hemos conseguido las mujeres del periódico El País,
and one of the main achievements of the female journalists at El País,
ha sido que nuestro libro de estilo, que marca las directrices con las que toda la redacción tiene que trabajar, elimine el lenguaje sexista y tenga una perspectiva de género.
Okay, so they have achieved that. What's the name of the book again, Alejandra? Sorry.
It's el libro de estilo, the style book, or I don't know how to translate it. The book in where all the rules, all the norms of our work in the newsroom are written, the vocabulary, but also the ethic.
Yeah, it's a gender neutral guideline
yes, without sexist vocabulary, and with a gender,
it's a gender neutral
perspective in it.
Okay.
So that's a huge, sorry, I'm going to try to do it in English. It's a huge achievement for us because the style books is for all journalists working at El País, but also has a lot of influence in other Spanish outlets. Maybe not in Spain, but I think that yes, but mainly in Latin America. They follow what El País, let's say, do, and the norms that rule our work. So that's a huge achievement that women of El País and women journalists achieved since 2019. It's been a slow progress, but we feel that we are achieving some of the goals we settled on 2018. And of course, still we have a lot of work to do. For example, in having more experts, female experts, voices, and gender balance information. But we are working on that because since 2018, we are together. We have a group in where we share our thoughts, where we share our demands, when we share what's going on in the newsroom, and we remind, oh, we still have to do this or that. So I think that is happening in many Spanish outlets since 2018, that all female journalists came together in Las Periodistas Paramos, in the We Journalists, Female Journalists Stop. And let me just finish saying that of course, we have a lot to do in Spanish outlet, also in international outlets. I wrote an information about Lubas Kasova research, in which she said that only 1% of the information published during the pandemic were about gender topics, only 1%. So although we sometimes think that we are doing well and we are progressing, I think we have tried to do more, not only female journalists, but all people who works in the newsroom. And that's why we are asking for more female leaders in the newsroom. And I think that the people who are in charge get more open-minded. The more we insist in that we need more female leaders in the newsroom. And just let me finish saying that this year in Spain, we are in Madrid, in the capital city, we are not allowed to I don't know how to say, manifestarnos. Julian, help me.
To demonstrate.
To demonstrate or to go to the streets to celebrate this International Women's Day due to the pandemic. But let me say that no other movement have been forbidden in the streets during the pandemic, only International Women's Day. And that's a pity, and we are denouncing that today.
All right. Thank you so much for that, Alejandra. That was, I think, really insightful for us, especially knowing that all the way in Spain as well, the challenges in the newsroom are much the same. What I must say, and I hope to be able to glean that from you later on during the panel session, was the 2018 swelling of the grassroots movement within women's journalism something to do with the global resurgence of the Me Too movement? Maybe, maybe not. We'll find out a little later. Thanks once again, Alejandra. You were wonderful. From there, we move on into continuing with our fourth presentation. And our fourth presentation is by our very own Malaysian feminist tech activist, Jac Sm Kee, and she will be speaking on reclaiming spaces and expression through online gender activism. Hi, Jac. Afternoon. Happy Women's Day.
Happy Women's Day. Hi, Tehmina.
Thank you very much. Jac, the floor is all yours. Please go ahead.
Thanks a lot. So I'm going to speak a little bit about basically what is the conversation around journalism, sexism, and violence when you think about this from an online sphere. And the online space has become important for both formal and informal forms of journalism. So we know right now pretty much every single major newspaper has an online presence, and sometimes in tandem with print and sometimes with their own editorial board. And online news portals are also increasingly becoming a very key source of news. I think I was just asking a journalist earlier today, how many news portals do we have in Malaysia with like the grey online news portal badge? And should be like, sort of counting them and thinking about probably 9 or 10 right now. And the fact that I couldn't readily find it means that, okay, it might be a good exercise for us to also like monitor and set up a bit of a spreadsheet time to sort of figure out what's happening within these practices, because they are pretty formal and institutional as well, but do not get subjected to the same form of scrutiny as the more traditional forms of mainstream media, for example. But there was a research by Zaharul Nain in 2018 that sort of speaks about an increased reliance in Malaysia on online news and social media. That's not surprising because there is huge skepticism towards bias, towards partisan reporting, towards censorship on mainstream media, where people are, coupled with increasing on internet accessibility, where then people turn more and more to online news sources and the desire to also seek out your own curated content. So through your curated network of trusted sources, whether these are Twitter handles or individuals use Facebook for their analysis of what's happening, or WhatsApp group, or all other forms of online sources. And so what is the kind of like, gender component of this particular context? I think both Mas and Ika, and also you, Tehmina, spoke a little bit about online, about the precarity of not having full-time jobs as journalists. And I think online news portals especially often employ contract journalists, often are stringers. There is precarity in this. There's kind of like, different kinds of protection that you sort of need to think through. And then there are also very specific kinds of attacks that women journalists face, and a lot of these happen online. Online gendered hate speech is a project that increasingly is being documented. So when we first came into this room, we saw a video, I think it was a UNESCO project that was really trying to capture like what is the experience of online gender-based violence that women journalists face. And projects like this is actually really, really important because it really raises to the surface what is a specific dimension of this particular work that is gendered, that is, that sort of is compounded by all forms of identity. And the Global Media Monitoring Project, which is the longest running project that kind of like, monitors sexism or gender stereotypes in media, since 1995, which is the Beijing platform for action that Mas was speaking about in the beginning, has begun to also look at monitor digital media as part of this work recently. So that's like the kind of like regular monitoring that we do almost has to expand its lens towards expanding of the ecosystem and trying to understand, okay, so what is the digital layer to this? Are we talking about, formal online news portal? What about informal ones and so on? And how do we also begin to understand the gendered dimension of this particular form of journalism? And whistleblowing has become something that's really critical in terms of social media, has become one of the places in which, especially around sexual harassment, we heard about Me Too being spoken about a few times. And this has had several different iterations in this country. So for example, a female journalist who spoke out against a dermatologist about her experience of sexual harassment. I think in June, middle of last year, there was a series of unfolding experiences of young women speaking about their experience of sexual harassment on Twitter. Often this is the dynamics, like you have one person and then it opens up and it opens up and it opens up and it becomes like, this unfolding of the ability to speak about a very shared experience that often you're worried about talking about. And of course, the kind of sexual harassment and sexual harassment allegations that happen in one of the very popular radio stations in Malaysia also came out through online media, WhatsApp, and then Twitter, and then made public. So it's become a really kind of important intermediary space to lift the lid on sexist practices that happens within different kinds of industries, especially around sexual harassment. And social media also becomes a space to talk about issues that generally do not get press coverage, or to talk about the existence of people who are often non-existent in mainstream media, except maybe as, caricatures and demons, which is a chronic problem. And by this, of course, so for example, there are a lot of content creators or feminists who talk about key issues in things like TikTok and Instagram and YouTube and Twitter and so forth. So, for example, Faizati is a really badass, satire illustrator who provides very damning critique around Muslim women's experience in Malaysia. She's super great. And then a lot of influencers on Instagram and on Twitter and on TikTok sort of mix things to talk about body positivity as well as sexual autonomy, as well as sexual and reproductive health and rights, especially amongst young people. And these are really important spaces that open up. News related to, of course, LGBTQI experience in Malaysia. This is a big, a big point of disparity. So sites like Queer Lapis or Song Sang Studios provide a really, really critical kind of informal community-based journalism, if you will, about key issues and insights and priorities about hidden populations or discriminated populations in Malaysia. So yes, presence and visibility, and also about particular kinds of topics. But of course, with this, there are the very predictable backlash and attack. And this is part of the context, and this is part of the reality. So in a non-gendered, if you don't apply so on the basic, basic context, it's already an extremely hostile environment to engage on expression and on sharing information in Malaysia online. There are a myriad of laws that I will spend a long time talking to you about, but there are so many and so broad that is being used in many, many different ways to silence. So the most recent, for example, Malaysia Cleany, one of the oldest alternative news sites in Malaysia, against all odds, still surviving. If you're not a subscriber, I urge you to please subscribe. Has been slapped with a $500,000 fine for comments that other people put on their website. So this has long repercussions about the chilling effect on news portals, which this is not the space to talk about, but I think it needs to be also integrated into our thinking around better journalistic practices. Of course, criminal defamation is always something that is being used to silence, particularly around whistleblowing of sexual harassment issues, and I think that's a really key thing to think through, right? In terms of defamation being used as a form of silencing, and of course, very, very organized and targeted forms of prosecution, both formal and informal, towards specific gendered bodies, and that is compounded with sexuality, race, and religion in online hate speech. So we see this particularly around towards LGBTQ communities, but not only. So, for example, there was a journalist a female Chinese journalist who was speaking up again, was reporting and asking questions about a particular minister and their policies on logging, and then the kinds of attacks that she got was, of course, also extremely racist, and not to include not to detract from the fact that it's also gendered and so forth. So it's an intersectional thing, basically. It's not only gender, it's not only sexuality, but in this region, also definitely about race, also definitely about religion, and that is a lens that we need to put on this. And most critically, I think the way to kind of analyze the reality of attacks that women and LGBTQ people face online in using the online sphere to engage in all forms of journalism, whether citizen or formal, is that the attacks can flow from space to space. And the best kind of example for this is actually IWD 1 year ago. So International Women's Day March last year, where there was a march, and then the march, and then after the march, of course, the march is organized. Actually, the organizing of the march itself is a fantastic story to talk about, but maybe in another space, in that, you know, it really speaks about the power of social media in supporting organizing and informal actors coming together in solidarity, and also different kinds of issues being woven together that is about gender justice and equality. And also, it was also, of course, the LGBT community was part of this movement because it is about gender justice. But one, like, you know, a couple of headlines that speaks about LGBT hijacking of the movement. One headline in the mainstream newspaper, you know, mushroomed into, actually it was one photo that was taken from Twitter into Facebook, and then the Facebook post turning into a headline in a couple of mainstream newspapers, which then mushroomed into more headlines that was misreporting the event, which turned into a parliamentary debate that was really awful to watch, which then turned into police reports against the organizers for a range of things. So I think that flow and that movement from space to space, from the digital space to the mainstream media, to kind of like, you know, the state apparatus in silencing women's expression, or in silencing and tamping down sort of women's political protest, is an important one to think through as well. Let's see. I did this research last year with another kind of really badass, like, you know, feminist journalist, feminist analyst on social media journalism, Jac. And one of the things that we really saw is that there are many countries in Southeast Asia that has a national budget allocated specifically to push government propaganda online. And one of the tactics that have been observed by women's rights activists that is paying attention to social media and looking at how discourse is circulating, really noticed that often attacks on women, or attacks on LGBTQ people, or misogyny is being put out by state bodies, specifically to distract from other things that are happening. So, for example, distraction from corruption inquiries, or distraction from kind of policy that's being pushed forward that has an economic impact that is unpopular. So then it becomes this easy scapegoat that gets thrown out. And I think this budgeting allocation thing is something that we also need to pay very critical attention to, because this isn't just about you know, something that is kind of dealing with systemic sexism, but it's about kind of the resourcing of structural sexism that comes out in the form of violence. And Malaysia was named as one of the top countries where governments engaged in cyber trooping in a recent report this year. So what do we do given that this is, like, you know, this is the situation? And I feel like sometimes this effort to stamp out the expression of women, or the effort to stamp out the expression of LGBTQ people, is a bit like trying to dry out the ocean by sending out warships. So, like, it's you can try, but the ocean is going to be there. Like, for example, one of the most hopeful things for me this year is, let's go back to the Malaysia Kini example, where they were like, you know, they were fined $500,000, and then it was raised in less than 5 hours. And that just shows the kind of appetite and desire for people to really, you know what, we really want independent, unbiased news. We really want a news, access to information and content that is not so suffocated through all of these different forms of bullying tactics, if you will. And feminists are online. They are organizing. They have very strong connections. They're extremely smart with strategies, and laws may be very slow. So, for example, the sexual harassment bill has been in pipeline since I was a baby activist in maybe like the early 2000s. But feminist networks are very solid and very mature, and there has been always extreme solidarity, like, you know, quick and strong solidarity in situations of sexual harassment and attacks, and very prepared. So last year's International Women's Day March had a help desk even. So it's like, you know, we know what's kind of like happening. And one thing that's also very heartening is that freedom of expression movements in Malaysia have a very strong, has people with very strong gender analysis within them. Many organizations are also led by feminists who are monitoring violations and discrimination from that specific lens also. So there's critical intersectional work in organizing with this regards. So for example, the FOE cluster has people working on film, on freedom of expression, on digital rights, on Muslim women's rights, on LGBTQI rights. So it really sort of understands the intersectional rights and discrimination issue. It's a big part of thinking about freedom of expression and free press and organizing together as part of this. So in terms of our monitoring and analysis, we really need to have this lens as well, to really also have an ecosystem approach to understand both formal and informal, to see how this flows, to see also expanding this kind of idea of who is a journalist. We need to hold different stakeholders accountable, increase protections, really we need to have a sexual harassment law, like come on now, it's about time. And really sort of reform and abolish laws that stifle reporting and whistleblowing, so really cast a lens on criminal defamation, pressure social media to improve their mechanisms for reporting, and of course also build skills and participate in solidarity action, and to support kind of free radicals and feminists, and also people like Tehmina, journalists amongst us who may not have the protection of institutions in our organizing. And that's, I'll stop here.
Alrighty, thank you so much, Jac. Jac, that was incredibly rich, incredibly insightful. Hi, am I on screen yet? Hi, thank you so much, Jac. You were incredible. I think it was super insightful, especially contextualizing it with exactly what has been happening in the digital sphere, particularly for women journalists and human rights defenders as well. So from there, we're speedily going to move on into our last presentation right before we move into the panel session. We have also been receiving lots of very, very interesting questions that are truly applicable to many of our panelists. Please keep them coming. We'll be dealing with those right after we finish the panel session itself, all right? So our fifth and final presentation for today is by Annalise Langela. She is Program Coordinator for South and Southeast Asia for Free Press Unlimited, and her topic of the day is Off News Headlines and Beyond Media Monitoring for Gender Sensitivity. Hi, Annalise, how are you?
Hi, I'm well. Good morning. Happy International Women's Day. Thank you for introducing me. I will try to share my screen. That's always a little bit exciting.
All right, no problem. All good. Floor is yours, Annalise.
Start here. Yes. Okay, well, I'm Annalise Langelaar. I work for Free Press Limited. I'm not sure if people know that organization, but it's a media development organization that supports media professionals in, globally actually. And we have a strong program on gender, as you can see on this slide. It's called the Gender Equality in Media program. And in that program, we focus on, three areas. The first one being the creating an enabling environment for gender equality in the media. The second one, to facilitate production of inclusive gender-sensitive content and ensuring equal participation and decision-making by women in the media. Free Press Limited follows an inclusive approach, so we also involve men in our programs because it's not only the women that can change or have to change, it's mostly men. So we involve them in our conversation and programs. You can see we also have 6 interventions, one of them being the Gender Media Monitoring and Gender Mainstreaming program at the workplace. And that's the one I will dive into today. I also like to take the opportunity to plug our own campaign that we are running each year at International Women's Day to create awareness on media or for women in the media. It's called Media for Women campaign. And as you can see the hashtag M4W 2021, it should be actually, sorry for that. I will share the details in the chat after my presentation, but I'd like to raise awareness of it and, of course, ask you to join our campaign. So I will discuss some the media monitoring. As Jack already mentioned, this source, actually, the Global Media Monitoring Project, well, this is the longest research worldwide on media monitoring. But why is this important? Globally, media content remains far from gender sensitive. Women in media are still significantly underrepresented in comparison to that of men. Women's viewpoints are not included and are often portrayed according to stereotypes. Well, most notifying is that there has been any change or hardly any change since the last 20 years, as you can also see on this slide. The picture you see is from 2020, actually. This is the preliminary findings, so it's not, the whole report's not out yet. So this is just a short view. And you can see that there has been a slight increase of women in the media, but it's still very low. So the average is around 24% in newspapers, television, radio, and internet. Well, and the rest is for men, actually, the space they take. So 24% of people featured in newspapers, television, and radio are women. Only 4% of all newspapers, radio, and TV reports worldwide challenge actually stereotypes, so that's very low. And 81% of experts that are interviewed are men, and women are twice as likely to be portrayed as victims than men. And so this is the global view. It is since 1959, so the 24% is from the 2015 project, and the picture is from the 2020 project, and we're still waiting to receive the final results. We have done a study also from Malaysian media, actually, together with Lei Kim Wang. She's not here, I guess, but if she's there, it would be good to hear her voice. We did it together with her under the Media for Democracy program, and we used the Global Media Project method. So we studied media outlets, Malaysian media outlets, 6 media outlets, of which were 2 newspapers, 2 online newspapers, and 2 television, 3 in Malay and 3 in English. And in total, in 2018, we coded 48 news items and 8 items for each media outlet. And the topics we studied, the stories or the articles were on topic, on the gender of the journalist, the number of men and women mentioned as a source, and if the stories are focused on women or groups, how they were focused on, and whether there were stereotypes. So, and then the stereotypes we divided in blatant stereotypes, subtle stereotypes, and gender blind stereotypes. Well, as you can see in the tables, orange is the women and blue is men. So if you look at the right one, for me at least the right one, you see that 75% of the sources in the stories we analyzed are men and only 25% women. We also saw a huge difference in the topic of the stories. So as you can see on the graphic right on the top, you see that men cover a lot more politics and government than women. Actually, economy, there were just no women at all. And social issues, well, that's a lot covered by women, but actually still more by men. And if you look at the bottom graphic, you see the divisions between the stereotypes. So actually most of the stories or articles we studied were gender blind, and gender blind meaning is that there is a lack of gender balance of sources. So there's really, it's giving only a man perspective in the story. And that's, of course, a missed opportunity because there are a lot more angles to include. So this is then Malaysia. So it's actually not a lot. So it's 25%, a little bit, well, it's a little bit similar like the global one. And if we then go to the Dutch one, well, it's not really a big difference. The data is in Dutch. I'm sorry for that, but I will translate a little bit. So this is also the Global Media Monitoring Project from 2020. So these are also the preliminary findings. We did this together with Women Inc., a Dutch NGO that supports women, women rights. And what we did 207 news items. We analyzed 207 news items, of which in total 585 persons were coded. In total, we coded 6 newspapers, 3 radio news, 3 TV news, 4 online news websites, and also Twitter accounts, 4 Twitter accounts. And well, the yellow graphic on the right, since it's 26% of all the news items we studied were only women, and 69% were men, and of 5% the gender was unknown, the sex was unknown. So that really is a little bit, yeah, it's a similar date as or statistics as the global statistics and the Malaysian statistics. The graphic below that is the gender representation in the news, whereas the yellow bars are the women, the red bars are the men, and the greens is unknown. And the first row is all items, and the second row is experts, and the third row is directly quoted. Well, as you can see, the women presentation is really, really low. The total one being 26, the experts being 24%, and directly quoted only 23%. And if we then look at the bar on the left, on the top left, that's the division between the news items. So like we also showed in the Malaysian data, in the Netherlands, it's actually quite similar. So yellow being women and red being men, and a green unknown. Blue is other, but there's no blue, so I will not dive into that. But as you can see, the yellow bar for the women is quite high, like 48%. For news, that's about social issues and rights. And the lowest one is arts, media, and sports. So in these 2 items, very typically women are relatively more mentioned in the news items. But if you look at the top one, that's politics and government. The second one is economy. The third one is very low, that's science and health. And that's very interesting because this was measured during the COVID crisis, which is still going on, obviously. But most of the women, of course, or most of the caretakers are women and nurses, etc. But still, it's not visible in the media content. And the lowest one being crime and violence, actually. Okay, let's continue to the... Well, why is media monitoring important in contributing to gender equality, and what can you do with it? Well, media should reflect societies as they are and for what they could be. And societies don't exist only out of men or stereotypes. And besides an environment in which women are stereotyped and in many cases highly sexualized, creates an enabling environment for violence against women, actually. So media can play an important role in how people form their identities, social norms, and values. And media can perpetuate stereotypes, but also challenge them. So by showing a wider variety of roles and behaviors of men and women, media can have the potential to influence attitudes and shape social norms that contribute to gender equality. Inclusive portrayal in media contributes to better prospects on the labor market and in a more equal work care division between men and women. And in doing so, actually, the representation of people of color must be considered age, gender, and background. But like anything, before you can solve a problem, you have to know that you have a problem. And to know what is the status of gender representation in the media, data is needed to create awareness at both the media, but also at the audience level. So basically, data monitoring reveals where things go wrong. So media need to take into account this data in order to produce more gender inclusive and diverse content. Data increases awareness on the existing issues and therefore helps to move towards a better position of women in and by the media. And it's therefore essential that the media and government systematically monitor how often and how women and men appear in the media. And I believe that Alejandra in their presentation that media think they are doing well, but if you actually look at the content, how women are depicted, well, there's still a lot of lessons to be learned, I think. Well, what can you do with media monitoring? Well, you can make the results public, make digital noise, campaign with it, and show what the actual status is of women in the media. Well, the Global Media Monitoring Project is doing quite well. We've done a study in Malaysia in 2019, but it would, of course, be good to do this, I don't know, quarterly, annually, and indeed to make it public and make digital noise about it. Also important is to show the results among the relevant stakeholders in the respective country you live in, and to discuss the root causes of it. So there's a lot of cultures that have a patriarchal culture. So that's a huge issue. It's a challenge because sometimes women's journalists and women in general don't even notice the stereotypes, and they just live in stereotypes, but they are not aware that's actually a stereotype. So these are discussions that must be held. You should discuss this with editors-in-chiefs, present it in newsrooms, discuss why female journalists are not getting, for example, economic beats, why are the female sources so low, and how about women journalists in senior positions and management positions? Why are there none, or why is that so low? Provide tools and training on how to make a gender-sensitive content. A great tool was suggested by Mas in the 50/50 database tool of the Malaysian women experts. That would be a great tool that newsrooms can use actually to improve their sensitive content. And also provide media literacy on gender lenses towards media producers, but also the public. So media literacy is mostly targeted at often children, high school, or the general public. And that mostly has to do with fighting disinformation. But in terms of gender lenses and recognizing stereotypes, media literacy is also very crucial a tool. Also most important, and I think this has also been discussed already or mentioned already by Mas and by Ika, that you should combine with multiple strategies and multiple stakeholder consortia if you really want to tackle this problem. So work together with various partners, with CSOs, media outlets, and create a consortium, as that works, I think, the best. But also it has to be it has to have multiple strategies. So if you work on gender sensitive content, you should also focus on gender leadership in the newsroom. And if you focus on gender leadership in the newsroom, you should automatically also focus on gender safety or female safety for journalists in the newsroom. So basically all these areas of work are intertwined. If you work on the first one, you should also actually work on the second one to really make a change. And that's my presentation. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you so much, Annelies.
Let's stop sharing. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, that's right. Let's stop sharing. Thank you so much, Annelies. Really super insightful presentation. We really are very grateful for the work that you do, and especially the fact that you contextualize it within the Malaysian media landscape as well. And I think the numbers, the data, all of it points to one thing. What we need is a gender sensitized media, a gender equal media. And I love that one of the first issues you brought up, that you need to involve men as well for gender sensitive content. All right. So with that, we've actually come, everyone, to the end of the 5 mini presentations by our esteemed panelists. All wonderful, all supremely insightful. You've all been keeping your questions coming as well. I can see the chat literally still blowing up with really, really interesting questions. From there, we are now going to move into the panel discussion itself. So let's bring in all the panelists to join us on screen. We're going to be bringing on, of course, Alejandra to join Annalise, joined by Mas, Ika, as well as Jack. Alrighty. Okay, welcome back, everyone. So we're going to be having a short panel discussion now. I'm going to put out a generalized question first that I think is really on everyone's mind. So we really spoke about creating women's journalist networks, and that appeared to be the main manner in which to build capacity. However, in the context of Malaysia, where unions have, of course, been always formally discouraged, how do we build capacity? How do we overcome these challenges? Anyone who would like to take that, if you could just sort of raise your hand and then go for it. Perhaps we look towards our Malaysian panelists for their insights first. Mas, maybe Jack.
Maybe I'll say something.
Sure, Mas, go for it.
Okay. I think, one, we have the journalist network. You mentioned that, right? There's unions, National Union of Journalists. Currently, it's actually the Secretary General is being led by a woman. She's a lot more proactive compared to previous leadership in terms of looking at rights, and all that. And not just rights, not just bread and butter issues for journalists, but also in terms of media freedom, looking at it from that perspective. So that's one. Two, there's also a group called Permata, though I think it's for women journalists. I think though it's more like a social thing. I think it was from the 70s or 80s, and they do a lot of visits to other countries and all that. So if you're looking for something that is dynamic, that touches on women who want to do women journalists who want to do something, then maybe it's time to set up one. Just to also mention that under National Union of Journalists, I think online media journalists are only associate editors. I don't know if that has changed. And it shows how archaic some of these union regulations are, right? Their own internal regulations and limitations with regards to how they want to get organized. It's no surprise in a way that, the union is not as strong as it used to be. I mean, currently, if you see in Malaysia, the formal media organizations, if you look at traditional media, whether it's TV and all that, unions are just not strong in these places if they exist.
At all.
Yeah. So it's time to, Tehmina, it's time for you and other journalists to set up our own media organizations that are made up of women, maybe, if that's what we want, to champion some of these issues.
Thanks so much for that. Thank you, Mas. Do we still have Jack on the line? If not Jack, then perhaps Ika, you could also perhaps key in with how Indonesian journalists and feminists are actually organizing to sort of overcome what's been happening. But I would love if I could have your thoughts also on how this is happening over the COVID-19 pandemic, where most of us are working from home as well. So that adds a further layer of difficulty, right?
Okay. Tehmina, I think I want to start from within our organization. We have included gender equality commitment in our organization regulation and case handling guideline. But more than that, we need to involve more parties to collaboration, such as National Commission for the Protection of Women, the Press Council, and other women organizations. We are working together to push for the passage of the law on the elimination of sexual violence, but I know it's very hard for this year because we receive many digital attacks in media, in journalists, and yeah, I think we need public awareness to give support to media and IG, but we need a special strategy to encourage all the public and reader to give support us. Yeah, I think we must bring the concept of gender mainstreaming into everyday concepts that are close to society's problem. What is the impact of water scarcity on the faith of women? What is the impact of expensive health facility on the faith of the mother? Yeah, we need more coverage that is close to everyday realities. This coverage can then be written in various local languages with other mother tongue on communities in remote areas of the violence. Yeah. I think we need more collaboration with all the national community, in the international community, and also a local community to bring this issue together in our media. Tehmina.
Thank you for that, Ika. I love the fact that you brought up that gender mainstreaming needs to be not just focused upon, but happening now. I see gender mainstreaming lacking even in, for example, vaccine rollout coverage. How is that going to be affecting, for example, our rural women, our underprivileged women, those who do not have access to maybe a smartphone or internet connections to even be registering for their vaccine appointments. So many issues, but moving in sharply as well. Jac, your insights as well on the same. Overcoming this all during the there's also the maelstrom of the fact that all leadership roles are almost exclusively male. We had a statistic there from, I think it was Alejandra earlier, where she said only 6% of women are in leadership roles, but they're not policy-making roles. I think in Malaysia, it's the dearth is even more urgent. Let's just put it this way. I'm an almost 40-year-old woman in journalism. I have no female mentors who are, slightly older than me. It's as much as that. So more and more, I think it's sort of becoming like a younger and younger women's game. But that also means that you deal with the fact that the feminization of the journalism labor force means these young women entering the industry are earning much less. They have much less power as well.
Yeah, no, that's a really key point. And one is about kind of like, participation, and then the other is about leadership. Yes, you often have many women who's coming in, but then at the lowest and at the most precarious form of the work situation or of the industry. I think there's formal ways of organizing, which Ma spoke about, that's really key. Like, really thinking about unions as a very, very important form of collective representation to demand for better working conditions, to really also push for different kinds of policy changes. And I think that's super key. And I'm very heartened to hear about the new leadership that's much more gender aware and also rights positive. But there's also informal ways of organizing. And I think like the initiative like 50/50 is pretty much one of those, right? Like the first time I saw it was through somebody who messaged me on WhatsApp to say, hey, someone's doing this. Do you want to be part of the database because you want to increase this? And then the next time I saw it, it was on Twitter. And then now we're kind of talking about it. So these are like really valuable and heartening forms of informal organizing that's based on trust networks. That's also based on kind of like, existing strong relationships that's outside of the sort of structural power where we are very disempowered. So this is where we are starting from a place of power. because we do invest in our relationships because we have to. And it reminds me also a little bit about organizing in the technology space. So as a feminist tech activist, you can imagine the technology space is also extremely sexist, still very, very much male-led, and not only that, like very north-led, right? And so networking is a super key strategy and tactic that we have to do for ourselves. We have to figure out where are our own spaces where we want to connect with each other and what do we want to do in that connection. Even if it's just we hang out once a month and just talk about like, geez, this is the reality, what are we gonna do? That matters, like that kind of like, regularity and figuring out what is our space of connection. How do we hold this together? How do we understand power and distribute it in a different way from the institutions that we are part of? And how do we come together when violations happen? How are we going to enact, different kinds of, how are we going to document things, transform this in both like informal and structural ways? So I think that I feel is happening. And I feel that it is also something that we can lend a lot more of our energy and support to in whatever ways that we can from where we stand.
Thanks so much for that, Jack. Wonderfully put. And that reminded me of Alejandra's presentation earlier. Alejandra, if you're there. So I was really interested in the fact that you spoke about how since 2018, all of this activism has been happening amongst the women journalists. I was curious, as before, to ask you, did this have anything to do with the global resurgence of the Me Too movement? And the end of 2017 was also the Spanish feminist journalist movement caught up and encouraged by that?
Well, I think all feminist movements are linked to the Me Too, not because as Me Too is the origin of anything, but it has given more force to any feminist movement. I think at least in the Western countries, it's like it was also a moment in where outlets we had to tell a story about sexual harassment. And it was a moment in which we pressure our newsrooms to put it on the topic of the news agenda. So I think it changed, it helped to give force to the feminist movement. But I think that the feminist movement in Spain and also in Europe and I think worldwide is older than the Me Too movement. I think Me Too movement is the result of the fights that our mothers and our grandmothers made in the past. So I don't want to miss them. And I think just the Me Too movement was like, I don't know how to say in English, like a helper to make all the other demands bigger, but it's only a part of the feminist movement. Sexual harassment is just one of the many discriminations women suffer, and of course, one of the points we have been trying to highlight in Spanish outlets is that not only actors and famous people suffer from sexual harassment, but one of 3 women around the world suffer sexual or gender-based violence in their lives, during their lives. So I think it's important not only to give that importance to the Me Too movement, that of course it had an importance, but I think that the feminist movement is bigger than that. And female journalists, we don't have to focus only on that. It's just a helper. I don't know if I'm expressing myself. It helps, but we don't have to miss all the other fights that women suffer around the world.
Absolutely. I think you put it excellently, Alejandra, because I think it just helps to sort of everything else bubbles over because of also the sexual harassment and sexual violence which women journalists face. Just wanted to very quickly share some research which the Institute of Journalists Malaysia that I belong to and I'm a board member and director with in 2018, we also conducted a workplace sexual harassment survey for media professionals and journalists. We spoke in confidence to 20 odd individuals, 2 of which were male, the rest were all female. Of everyone who had been experienced sexual harassment, what stunned us was that half of them, exactly half of them, completely left the media and journalism industry. And everyone who left was female. So what we also have is that there is a huge reduction in the numbers of also those who could potentially be allies or gender sensitized or journalists working within the gender mainstreaming arena because of this sort of lack of protection even in the workplace. From there, very quickly, I also wanted to move on to what I feel is a much bigger question of the way media is built, the way tech is built, but it also links directly back to the media biases and stereotypes that we see as daily offenders. Panelists, I wanted to ask all of you, what are some strategies for ethical media sustainability? Because right now, when it comes to digital portals, we all know that what means the most is, having the type of sensationalized headlines that drive clicks, that drive traffic, and more often than not, these are always misogynistic. They are sexist. Just look at what is basically the biggest news story happening in entertainment media today. Meghan Markle and Prince Harry's interview with Oprah. Daily Mail. I mean, I think we've all seen the comparison of the headlines, the misogynoir, but that is what is driving sustainability of media. And until we're also able to somehow rationalize how there is a better way for media to sustain, to continue to deliver the news, I don't think we're going to be able to answer those 2 questions separately. Any thoughts from any of our panelists? Perhaps Annalise, especially with the media monitoring work that you do together with Free Press?
Well, this is a very big question and then I think difficult or impossible to answer because the problem is what drives media is money, basically, also for them to sustain. But in another research we've done, we've seen at least that media viability and diversity of the newsroom are intertwined. So actually more diverse newsrooms in the end create more money because you have more, you have more affinity with your audience. So I think that's a very important one, to include the gender lens in also media viability and business models, because that's the thing that media outlets thrives in the end. But also, if you talk about the headlines, what also very influences content production is, of course, that journalists don't have a gender lens themselves. It's not only that there are not enough women in the newsroom, but also men, they actually don't know how to report. So I think if you ask the journalist why do you create a title like that, I don't think he will actually be aware of the fact that it's very stereotyped or I don't think they are actually aware of that. What can help, of course, and that's actually the first question you raised, was to also have women more in leadership positions. So if editors-in-chiefs are women, they can in the end also decide on whether a headline can be that specific headline or not. As you discussed in the previous discussion, it's really difficult to get women in those leadership positions because they leave the job because it's dangerous, or they work on times that it's not handy for them if they are also mothers or have to run the household at the same time. So if you want to tackle this, you have to think, I think, on multiple levels. So media outlets should have gender policies. For example, I know that Malaysia Kini has a gender policy and all staff needs to read it and to sign it, for example. But only having gender policies, of course, is not enough. You also should monitor whether it's really implemented. I think workplace on sexual harassment trainings and workshops that you actually do with the whole newsroom can work. And indeed, as I said, you really should include men because they are still in the managing positions.
Mm-hmm.
And if they don't change their perspective, when they don't open up, it will be really screaming without anybody really hearing you. Not sure this is really answering your question, but I'm just sending my information.
No, absolutely, Annalise. I think you bring up what are the structural barriers in place right now that prevent this from happening, right? Very quickly, I'm just going to go around to the rest of our panelists. Ika, Mas, Jac, Alejandra, any thoughts on that same question? Because we do need to wrap up. I actually have so much more that I want to ask you. Have barely even, dented the questions that have been coming in, but we do need to move towards closing. Sustainable media, women's role, and what more can be done, if you have anything to add on to what Annalise had to say.
Just very quickly, I think
Sure.
I know that media organizations will listen when their subscribers or the people who buy the newspapers complain. So I think I just want to underscore public complaints, and I think to standard setting mechanisms like Media Council, for us to actually push for those things. In Malaysia, we've got that, like in the works that they've been trying to do that. But I think also hand in hand with that is media literacy among the public. We haven't even begun to address that. So clickbaits are only as good as people clicking or not clicking. So just to add that to the discussion. Thanks.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Any of our other panelists, last thoughts on this?
Well, can I jump in? I think we are very good in doing diagnosis of the situation, but not good in going into action. Sometimes we feel we don't deserve the position we have. Sometimes we feel that we are not going to be listened, but we have to do it. We have to go into action. And I think that's the only way we will achieve progress. And although we think the progress is very slow, more things have to be done from institutions and from top leaders, it's also us who have to fight and not to feel ashamed of our movement or of defending what we consider it's right. And I think women sometimes have that feeling that we don't deserve to achieve top positions, or we feel that our opinions are less important than males' opinions. So I think we have to create networks. We have to come together and not feeling afraid anymore. And I think that will be help. And of course, if audiences or readers click more or complain about not having gender balanced information, will help. But come on, they are not going to do that. I think they are not going to do that because we live in a patriarchy societies. So it's also us who have to point the problem inside of the newsrooms and just saying this headline is wrong or this photo is wrong, and coming together, that would be easier. We have experienced that in Spain, that journalists coming together, we can achieve more progress than one by one. So I think that just helping us together, female journalists, and coming together, and it's not something that we have to expect to be done from the institutions. It's just a WhatsApp group, it's a Facebook group. we can do it by Twitter or just trying to meet inspiring women in our trips to the field, or interviewing more women and having more gender balanced information. And of course, technology can help in that. We are thinking about how to improve, for example, having more experts' voices in information in our articles. And some outlets are testing some ways of doing that. For example, BBC is testing the 50-50 experience to have 50% of the experts being female. So I think we have to join and come together and help each other to achieve progress.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you make a great point about the informal networks as well, and the fact that, yes, it's more labor, but if we're strategic and we organize, I think we'll get it done a lot faster than just having to rely only on the public. Maybe that can back us up. I just have to ask, Ika or Jac, do you have any words to add to that before we close off?
Okay, I agree with the analysts, because we need a holistic strategy, I think, for the sustainability our media. We need to change our business model, because currently in Indonesia, with more than 40 outlet online media, is very not help for the business, and they only only based on the click and page view business. So make it the news is very biased in about gender. So AJI must give much more training about how to create the model business with alternative. Maybe we can like fundraising or crowdfunding, like that. And the important we can do for educating the public or reader, so they can to stop to click the bias title like that. And we need a public to educate it and criticize to media and give protests and like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Ika. Yeah, absolutely. Pushing for that subscription-based journalism model and its popularity, I think, is key. Jac, you were saying?
Sorry, thanks. Yeah, I'm really glad you brought in kind of the infrastructure level and how sexism is really coded into the infrastructure. And also we started to talk about kind of the economy, you know, so we really need to break down the monopoly and the economy of eyeballs, right? Like not to copy bad models and to really open up space for platform innovation that encourages different forms of engagement. So first things which really profits of eyeballs and the click culture, we need to call it out and say this actually has been fueling gender-based violence. This has been fueling online hate speech. Call it out and saying actually these kinds of infrastructure, not okay. Tax it. Tax it and disincentivize it and like really like, you know, create a culture around it that kind of rejects it. And then also for news, emerging news portal that really is having this aspiration for creating online news journalism, really understand that clickbait is very, very bad for business because clickbait encourages fake news. Clickbait encourages a culture of people just believing in shit and not believing in institutions that actually verify news. And if you are trying to be a news portal, then you should understand that if you encourage clickbait, you're actually killing your own business. So let's change the practices of media on the one hand and reward other kinds of engagement and behavior, like long reads, like podcasts that really goes in depth into analysis. These are new forms of content engagement culture that is emerging, that is actually kind of really great. So we need to also move towards this rather than get stuck in this very short-term, you know, little bit like drives us into hamster bunnies in our attention span.
Oh yeah.
So yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Jack. I think that was a wonderful summation and drawing together all those threads. Panelists, you've all been incredible. Thank you so much. I really enjoyed the thorough yet though short discussion that we have. And from there, moving towards the closing, let's never take for granted the chance to hear from journalists and activists, both Malaysian and global, about the challenges facing gender progressive journalism. So we can overcome them together, but it takes dismantling structural, institutional, and systemic barriers that uphold patriarchy's noose on women in media and the global imagination. Thank you once again to our panelists. I'm Tehmina Kaoosji. It's been a pleasure taking you all through the discussion so far. Now, speaking of telling difficult stories, as well as choosing to challenge the theme of this year's IWD, I now have the pleasure of handing over the floor to a female journalist who does exactly this, tell difficult stories. The wonderful Mahi Ramakrishnan. Now, Mahi is an investigative journalist and will be presenting today's closing remarks and a call to action. Over to you, Mahi.
Hello.
Hi. Hi, Mahi.
Hello.
Hi. The floor is yours.
Thank you.
Happy Women's Day, Mahi.
You're brilliant as usual. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for this opportunity, which I consider a big privilege to do the closing remarks today. I'm going to tell you a few stories as a way of getting into what I want to say. Well, the year was 2001, and I was on my way to buy a gun at the Yala Army camp in Thailand, southern Thailand. And that was because I was working on a story for Time magazine about how the Thai army was actually supplying weapons to Southeast Asia and how Malaysia remained a place where other militants come to actually buy and where they come to rest and recreate. So that story was a huge success because I managed to buy a Smith & Wesson's for 800 ringgit and then got the contact, a smuggler who actually took me in to dispose of the gun. And then I was making my way back to Kuala Lumpur to start writing the story. 2 weeks later, I was told that the contact who actually brought me in to see the Thai army was actually murdered. And then I get a call from someone who identifies himself as the second in command of the Thai military. And he says, I quote, "Madam, you have ruined the reputation of the Royal Thai Army." And because the call was just so sudden, I didn't know how to respond. And I said, "Sir, when you're in KL next, please call me. I'll take you out for dinner." But what happened is, a few years later, 2 or 3 years later, I started working more and more on issues that centered around trafficking. And a story that I did for Hartini Zainuddin was on baby trafficking. And it took me almost 2 years to do that film because it took me that much time to actually track down and convince a baby trafficker to actually allow me to film his silhouette. So we finished the filming and then he said, okay, fine, it's all done. You film me off the wall. I just looked black and you can't see my features. But if anyone ever finds out who I am, I'm going to traffic your daughter across the border and I'll put her in the sex trade. And I was terrified because he knew I had a daughter. So obviously he has done some homework on me. And as I recall now, or as I have been recalling over the last few days since getting this invitation to do the closing remarks, I realized that there was little to no support for female journalists such as myself who had to make really difficult, hard decisions. I didn't even know if I could actually put the film out because I was just so scared. I was scared for my children. But, it took me a few months actually to say, okay, I need to put this out and then I need to create an environment where I can be safe. So the film was screened. And then a few weeks later, I get a call from Charles Santiago, who's a Klang MP, and he asked me to do a film on migrant trafficking. So I said, okay, and I started working on the film. And that evening, I was actually going out to do an interview with the trafficker. And in the afternoon, I had to film a corporate video. So I had gone out and then I realized that I had forgotten something. So I went back home all in the span of 20 minutes and my house had been broken into. The lights were switched on, the air condition was on, all my clothes were on the floor, everything. The house was just in utter chaos, but they didn't take anything. The only thing they took was my laptop and my laptop charger. And when I looked at the CCTV camera, I saw that while they were coming into the lift, they knew exactly where the CCTV camera was. and they had used a newspaper to shield themselves. And I was shocked because even I didn't know or didn't really care to know where the CCTV cameras were. So I'm telling you these stories because 20 years down the line, nothing has changed. Things have gotten worse for female journalists. Things have gotten worse for women who actually try and embark on investigative journalism, because it was incredibly difficult for me at that point in time to go back home and live there. And I was so scared thinking about what could have possibly happened if both my children were at home when the break-in happened. Of course, the police came in and tried to investigate, and they were dusting for fingerprints, and they asked me whom I suspected, and I couldn't answer the question. But all I felt was real, chilling, gripping fear, because again, I felt like there was absolutely no proper support for someone like me who was trying to tell difficult stories. I was just trying to do my job, and it was that much more difficult. So like what all the other panelists have been talking about, online hate and death threats and rape threats and gendered violence, it has been happening and it is getting worse. And we do not really seem to have a proper policy that looks into it, or institutionalized support that can actually say, hey, there is a group of people here that can actually help you, that can help keep you safe. And, investigative journalism isn't easy. It's really difficult, not just because of the long hours or the tedious work that goes into even telling a 12-minute or even a 3-minute story, if it is investigative journalism. And I'm not just saying that it's only because of the tedious work, but I'm also saying because, when you look at it, it's also because of the pressure that comes from your family. And I have experienced this pressure. And I can safely say that we need to continue to choose to challenge the patriarchy that forces us, that works so hard to actually put us in a position or a place that it thinks we belong to, that forces us to actually choose between our jobs, our careers, and family, that puts on so much guilt, because we need to choose between becoming good mothers than, our careers. In my case, I was traveling so much and I was breaking so many stories, and I was specializing in Islamic militancy, stories on Islamic militants in Southeast Asia, and I was away a lot, I do admit. But, I also had a husband back then. But co-parenting was never the forefront of any topic. It was always about the fact that I was never home, that I was chasing a career, that I was into the limelight. It wasn't ever about the fact that I am a woman and I can make decisions about what I want to do for myself. Now, while I say that we need to choose to challenge the system and the patriarchy, I also understand that it's going to be that much more difficult and daunting for new women journalists who want to do investigative journalism. And I do talk to a lot of them, even now, who are so intrigued by the world of investigative journalism. They want to tell that deep, dark, difficult stories. They want to know how to dig deeper. They want to know how to establish context and how to go about doing this. But, it's also that much more difficult for them because they do understand that there is no proper support. So, but today, I must say, as I sit back and I listen to all of you, and I keep telling myself that this entire event today is premised on Saksi. And as Sumitra and me, we have been talking about Saksi for more than a year now, I believe. And I'm just so heartened to see it taking a shape. I'm so heartened to believe that Saksi is a potential platform that can not just bring all of us together, but a platform where I hope we can have conversations beyond today, but also act as a watchdog or a monitoring body that actually looks at the hate speech, the online hate speech, the gendered violence, and the kind of death threats and rape threats that are always that much more against women journalists and filmmakers. So, I would like to wish Saksi all success, and I really hope that we can work together in bringing this conversation forward. But before I end my closing remarks, I would also like to ask you to join me in solidarity with the primarily and mainly women protesters in Myanmar today as we speak, because the very fact that they are on the streets is an act of defiance. It's a symbolic gesture that they are showing their middle finger to the military junta. It's also the shattering of patriarchy, because the generals have worked so hard in drumming patriarchy over and over and over to keep these women in confined spaces. We see that shattering today. And while we may not be able to walk alongside these women in Burma, I really believe that through the might of our words, through the might of our pen, through the might of our stories, we will be able to speak up against tyranny and walk alongside them in solidarity. We will speak up against sexism and gender bias, and that we will continue to be able to speak up against every woman. So again, all the very best for Saksi, and thank you very much to Women's Aid Organization and the Netherlands Embassy for today's event. As I said, I hope that we can continue these conversations beyond today, and a very happy International Women's Day.
Thank you again. I'm sorry, I think we're having a couple of technical difficulties on Mahi's side. Do bear with us. We will be back shortly if Mahi is able to continue. Just give us a few moments. Thank you.
Was there like a lag?
Yes, Mahi, there was a little bit of a lag, and I think we lost perhaps the last 30 seconds to a minute of what you said. Would you mind just continuing, please, and perhaps repeating yourself if you don't mind? Thank you.
Sure. So I was just saying that I invite all of you to be in solidarity with the primarily women protesters in Burma, because as they take to their streets, the fact that they're taking to the streets in itself is an act of defiance. It's actually a symbolic gesture of showing their middle finger to the military junta. And it's also the shattering of patriarchy that the generals have tried over and over and over, so that they've tried preaching over and over so that they can put these women in confined spaces. Today, we hear the shattering of the patriarchy. And while you and me, Tehmina, may not be able to walk alongside them on the streets of Myanmar, I believe that through the might of the work that we do, through the might of the pen, through the might of our words, we are able to walk with them in solidarity. And in doing so, we are speaking against tyranny, against injustice, against gender violence. And we are speaking out for every woman. So I just want to say that once again, I hope that, Saksi can grow to become this advocacy tool in itself, can continue becoming a platform that will bring all of us today beyond, beyond today and in conversations. And I would like to say a very big thank you to Women's Aid Organization and the Netherlands Embassy for today's event, and a very happy International Women's Day.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much, Mahi. Thank you, Callista, for helping to translate for us as well. And with that, we've come to the close of today's event, the Gender Progressive Panel discussion with Saksi, WAO, and of course, supported by the Embassy of Netherlands. Tehmina Kaoosji, together with Mahi Ramakrishnan, as well as Callista, and the Women's Aid Organization team. We're signing off for now. Thank you so much. We hope we'll be able to also respond to all the other questions that have come in over the Zoom chat in time from the panelists themselves. Thanks a lot. Happy International Women's Day, and have a wonderful rest of the day ahead. See you next time.
Thank you, everyone. Tehmina.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.